Do not judge, so that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged, and the measure you give will be the measure you get. Why do you see the speck in your neighbour's eye, but do not notice the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your neighbour, "Let me take the speck out of your eye," while the plank is in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbour's eye.
Nobody likes friends who are too judgy, people who are quick to criticise, quick to condemn. We don't like that. So we look for people who are accepting and warm and inclusive and relational. And Jesus' little saying about judging here in Matthew 7 is so brilliant. It's so insightful. He says, the way you judge others, they will judge you. That's very true. The measure with which you measure out, you'll be measured back to you. But then he uses this powerful illustration. Let's be clear what we're talking about here. A speck of sawdust, if it gets in your eye, is very irritating. There's no question of that. But it's only a small thing, and you can remove it quite easily. And Jesus says some people have a speck in their eye, whereas other people have a plank in their eye. Imagine having a plank in your eye. I mean, it's a ridiculous, humorous illustration. He's trying to exaggerate the point. And he says, but if you've got a plank in your eye, don't think you can help someone else get the speck out of their eye. It's just not going to be possible. You've got to remove the plank first, and then you can help your neighbour with the speck in their eye. So to suggest that there is possibly a speck in somebody's eye and you've got a plank in your eye and you want to help them by getting the speck out of their eye, Jesus breaks it into 3 points. I mean, as well as being a very humorous saying, the visual image is hilarious. It's also got 3 wonderful points. First of all, it says, if you try and help someone else with their problems when you haven't dealt with your own problems, that's out. That's called hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is when you don't look at your own self, but you look at other people and criticize them. You never critique your own self with the way you criticize other people. And the issue with that is that people often focus on things which they are not guilty of, but they see in other people. But they don't see the things that they are guilty of, which sometimes are far worse. Jesus used this kind of illustration quite a lot. For him, the Pharisees and the religious people had it all wrong. They focused on external problems, people's outward behaviour. They would look at someone who was, let's say, an alcoholic or had been sexually immoral, or people who had committed crimes, and they would think they were the worst people in the world. But they thought of themselves as holy, pure and righteous, because they didn't really rate the things in their lives which Jesus thought were far more destructive of community and far more damaging. Things like pride and superiority, and things like envy and manipulation and deceit. These things which are much more subtle. And he said it's like someone who cleans the outside of a cup, but the inside is still filthy. And so this is the same sort of thing. His person criticizing someone else because they've got a problem, it's like the outside of the cup is dirty. It's like there's a speck in their eye. And they're critical of them, but they haven't looked at what's inside their cup, which is filthy. Or haven't looked at the plank which is in their eye, which is something which prevents them from being constructive, wonderful, loving, contributing members of a healthy community. So the first problem is hypocrisy. And we must not go around criticizing other people before we've critiqued ourselves. Now, sometimes as a friend, we can share that we both have problems and let's work together on that sort of thing. I'm not saying you've got to be perfect before you can help somebody else. We'll come to that at the end. But this says that your first responsibility is to look at your own life. I recently heard about a deacon of a Baptist church. And I imagine this deacon, he'd been a deacon for a long time in a Baptist church, and he'd probably been, responsible for sitting in a meeting and where there was a complaint brought that the youth group had been too noisy. And here he is probably amongst those people saying, yes, yes, the youth group must be taught to be quiet and respectful. He probably had a complaint that someone got up and spoke and they were wearing a skirt that was too short. And they said, yes, 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 Christian girls should dress modestly. But after a while, it came out that this particular deacon was arrested for pedophilia. He'd been committing all kinds of sexual crimes in the dark. And here he is taking specks out of people's eyes when there's obviously a plank in his own eye that he hasn't dealt with. It's a great temptation for anybody who's in leadership, that you can sometimes focus on other people's problems and try and fix them when you don't work on yourself. So if the first problem is hypocrisy, the second thing that this little saying highlights is to look at your own self with integrity. Have integrity. Deal with the plank in your eye. So it's not enough to look at the speck in your brother's eye or your neighbour's eye or your sister's eye. You start by looking at the plank in your own eye. So before you critique anybody else, critique yourself. Before you fix somebody else, fix yourself. Integrity is trying to make yourself integrated. That is, that your inside is the same as your outside. You don't put on a front, you don't put on a mask, you just try and be who you really are, and you try and make that person a person who is good. You try and have a culture of goodness, of honesty and care, compassion. Integrity means that you do what you say, you practice what you preach. You really work on those things. You take a moral inventory of your own life. And when there are problems, you try and address them. You try and fix them up. You undergo disciplines. You try and draw closer to God. You try and make yourself a person who really does clean up their own mess, who really does take responsibility for your own needs and the impact that your life has on other people. I think these are some of the things that it means to have integrity. And in this way, you're taking the plank out of your eye. And so that makes you a person of integrity. The third point that Jesus makes in this little wonderful illustration is he says that once you've taken the plank out of your own eye, once you've got your own life sorted, then you can help someone else with the speck in their eye. And I know that my father was quite famous when he worked on a building site for having a very steady pair of hands. And when people got a speck in their eye, they'd often come to him. And he used to get a little piece of paper and he would fold it with a point on it, and he would help someone with a piece of sawdust in their eye, and he would be able to, with this little piece of paper, flick out the impediment that was causing them such irritation. And if someone's got a speck in their eye, it is greatly irritating, and we ought to be able to help them. And so if the first point is don't be a hypocrite, the second point is have integrity, the third point is we can show mercy to people, we can show kindness to people, we can be loving toward other people and support them with their difficulties. We can use our own experience and our own gifts and skills to strengthen other people so they can become the people they want to be. Nobody wants to stay bogged down and caught up in their problems. They want to be freed and liberated and forgiven for all their problems so they can find a life that's meaningful, serving God and being a blessing to their communities. And we need to help one another do that, but only once we've taken the step of fixing up our own lives first, taking the plank out of our eye so we can help them with the specks in their eye. We've got to be so careful with these things. Judgment, critique, condemnation. Jesus isn't saying accept everything, tolerate everything, forgive everything, overlook everything. Of course we've got to show discernment and discretion. We've got to know what is helpful and what is not. And we want to work with people to help them find those things in their lives which are making life difficult for them. There's so many things that often, dog a person all their lives and make it difficult for them to find a happy marriage or a happy church fellowship, a small group relationship. There are things that stop people being the person they could be and enjoying the life they could have. And if we can help them with that, that's part of our calling. We're not called on to judge and condemn and criticize, but we are called to support one another. And so Jesus does say at the end of this, then you can help your neighbour with the speck in their eye.